Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by onlinegreatbooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. I'm Scott Hambrick.
And I'm Karl.
And today on the Online Great Books podcast, we are going to be discussing James A. Mitchener's, 1947 novel, book?
Yeah.
Tales of the South Pacific. Is it a novel?
1946. It is a collection of related short stories.
Are they true?
Sorta.
It's a weird book.
Names and incidents have been changed to protect the innocent.
Yeah.
Or the guilty.
So this cat was in the Navy during World War II, and he was stationed in the South Pacific. And he was a commissioned officer, I guess, in the Navy, and did some stuff. He collected anecdotes from his time in World War II, and then wrote this book based on those anecdotes. It's not clear what the heck this thing is. It's a strange, strange book. I enjoyed it, but it's weird.
I enjoyed it too. And look, I think the first paragraph tells you what it is. Okay, so I'm going to read it. I wish I could tell you about the South Pacific, the way it actually was, the endless oceans, the infinite specks of coral we called islands, coconut palms nodding gracefully toward the ocean, reefs upon which waves broke into spray, and inner lagoons lovely beyond description. I wish I could tell you about the sweating jungle, the full moon rising behind the volcanoes, and the waiting, the timeless repetitive waiting. But I want to do the second paragraph too. But whenever I start to talk about the South Pacific, people intervene. I try to tell somebody what the steaming Hebrides were like, and the first thing you know, I'm telling them about the old Tonkinese woman who used to sell human heads as souvenirs for $50. Or somebody asked me what was Guadalcanal actually like, and before I can describe that godforsaken backwash of the world, I'm rambling on about the remittance man who lived among the Japs and sent us radio news of their movements. That is, he sent us the news until one day. The people intervene. So think about what happened. So when was Pearl Harbor? 1941?
Yeah.
Right? The Japanese amazingly caught the bulk of our Navy in harbor, disabled most of it.
Was it?
I think, careful there. I think there was one aircraft carrier that was not in port. Master military stroke, almost won the war for them. And then you're shipping a whole bunch of Americans out into the Pacific to counter the Japanese imperial ambitions. Well, what kind of people did you send? Just look around your neighborhood. Look at your neighbors. My neighbor is not a World War II veteran. He is a Korean War veteran, so he's a little bit younger. He's getting on up in years. He just celebrated their 70th anniversary.
Well done.
Wonderful, wonderful. But, he's this Italian kid from Chicago, gets shipped off to East Asia. Well, the generation before him, or the half generation before him, a whole bunch of them were shipped off to the South Pacific. Imagine what it would be like. And then they didn't do anything for a long time because we had to rebuild the Navy. In lots of places, they were just there. Making air bases, landing strips, setting it up for an eventual invasion of Japan, which in those days you had to island hop. The Pacific is big. If you take a globe, I have one down here. If you take a globe, you can spin it so the whole world's the Pacific Ocean, where you don't see any land. It's enormous. So if you want to stage some kind of invasion, you need to have bases everywhere. So you can fly from one to the next and pick up what you need and fly to the next. And it's incredible what you would need to do war out there. But you were going to do it with grocers from Wisconsin. You're going to do it with ordinary people from the middle of America. So it's a great big psychological experiment.
It's true.
That changed everything. I don't know. What would it be like? You grew up in Wisconsin. You end up on one of these islands, surrounded by Native women.
I grew up in Oklahoma, surrounded by Native women.
Yeah, you married one of them.
I did.
So I think that's what it's like. It's not. It's a different kind of a story. It is a story, but it's not. The tale of. Well, I don't know. If you wrote a story about World War II, you could follow one particular army through a long campaign. You could have a more novelistic structure. But I think he chose to do this because that's what it was like. It just kind of sits there like a bunch of islands, these stories, and they're kind of related and kind of not.
Had you read this before?
Nope, I had not.
I'm sure, being the geek you are, you've seen the musical South Pacific.
How dare you, sir? Yes, I have.
And the movie, probably. The 1958 movie with Michener, John Kerr.
Or the recent, there's a pretty good recent one with Kelly O'Hara and Paolo Jott playing Emile Debec from Lincoln Center. You can find it.
I've not seen any of those things, but as I read this, I cannot imagine making a musical out of this. It's the most absurd thing in the world.
The musical is completely different. The musical fastens onto a couple of stories. It shoves a bunch of characters together. So Lieutenant Joe Cable, he and Emile Debec are combined with this character Anderson, the remittance man in the musical. Nelly Forbush, which is a hilarious name, is much bigger in the musical than she is in the book. And the daughters of Emile Lebec are much more innocent and young and beautiful in the musical than they are in the book, where it appears they run some kind of bordello.
Yeah.
Latouche Lebec.
Well, Karl said, let's read Tales of the South Pacific. And I just listened to our show about Hornblower. And you, in the beginning of that show, you say, well, I went to the Barnes & Noble to pick up a copy of Zane Grey, which you recommended. And you said it's a loaf of bread of a book at over 300 pages. This is 375 pages of tiny, tiny print. This is bigger than the Zane Grey book, I think.
Yeah, but
it's
short for a Mitchener novel.
Oh, that's right.
Mitchener novels are usually 1,000 pages.
So we got to go short next week. What are we going to read next week?
I don't know, an essay, an E.E. Cummings poem.
Can we read Thomas Carlyle's Signs of the Times, 1829?
Sure. I've never read it.
Nor have I.
It is October the 8th currently. I don't know what week that is of the year. How many shows have we done this year?
Oh, Lord. Well, one a week.
Which means that's how many books we've read, in addition to books for Online Great Books and a few that I read for fun. It's a whole lot of reading.
I'm feeling a little abused right now.
But we're doing it to point you, dear listener, to some things you might not have thought of doing. And also, frankly, to support our enterprise at Online Great Books.
Yeah. Go to onlinegreatbooks.com/podcast and sign up. Get on our mailing list over there. We've got a good newsletter that Katie puts out, and we'll send you a little digest of our reading list, some little scene essays from Stringfellow Barr and Mortimer Adler we send out to people to get on our mailing list. Some interesting stuff on there. So get on there, and then we'll let you know the next time the enrollment opens up. What we do is tough, Karl. It's hard to get people to do this. Is this harder than barbell training or easier?
Harder.
I think so.
Barbell training, you're tested that day when you go in and do your lifts. And it's a test of your perseverance. And if you are the right sort of person, you can persevere and get yourself really, really strong. But then you can go home and you can forget about your training.
Yeah.
When we're reading all of the stuff that we read at Online Great Books, then you go talk about it. Well, that 2 hours you talk about, I had a wonderful session with Seminar 1 on Julius Caesar earlier this week. But the thing is, Julius Caesar doesn't leave you alone. You start reading him, and then he's in your head, and then now he's your friend or your enemy or somebody judging your management decisions. And you think, well, what would Caesar do? And so the testing's a little bit more ongoing. So I think it's more difficult. It's not as physically difficult, but it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, and people don't care about it as much. Like the people around you, if you get big and strong, people are like, wow, man, I haven't seen you in a while. You look great. What have you been doing? You've been working out. You do this, you get no external validation from it. It's a very personal endeavor. Tales of the South Pacific, Karl. It's not a great book, man.
You didn't like it?
I liked it. It was fun to read. It is a mid-century, 20th century American book that is interested in depicting all the weird id and ego of strange people. It has that weird mid-century character development stuff that kind of bugs me nowadays.
Tell me more.
Maybe that's not the right way to say it. These characters many of them are neurotic. There aren't any clear-cut heroes in here.
Luther Billis.
Well, Luther Billis he's a Loki kind of guy, you know. Luther Billis does heroic things. He's a man of abilities and daring, but he's also kind of a trickster, and he lives kind of outside of the system. And he's almost comic relief. There's no Achilles in here, you know. There's no Caesar in here.
Well, no, and I think it'd probably be inappropriate in this kind of story because this isn't about the conquering. It's about, Admiral Kester is in charge of the ultimate place where they fight. But it's not about the fighting. It's about the before the fighting. So you brought up the Iliad. So they were on that beach for 10 years, supposedly. Mm-hmm. What were they doing before they started fighting?
I don't know, chasing Tonkinese girls.
Can you imagine Ajax going on a beer run down the coast?
Sure.
We're out of beer. Go send Ajax.
Joseph Heller certainly read this before he wrote Catch-22, right? This smells like Catch-22.
Yeah, so you want more of the heroic in it.
I do. You know, is it Commander Hogue? Commander Hogue that commands the Sea Beast Battalion is a hero here.
On the other hand, they're all heroes. It's a different way of presenting it. So if you go to, in our edition, we have this wonderful edition. I don't know how many more readings it's going to withstand. The pocket books, 35 cents, Tales of the South Pacific, printed in 1958. Pocketbooks of a size that you could fit in your jacket pocket, your suit coat pocket as you went off to your job, and you could read on the train. This is what you did before we had cell phones.
So I bought mine on eBay, Karl. And it has those cards in it like you were talking about where you could, order. In the front here, there's a card for subscribing to Time Magazine. 44 weeks for $4.84.
If you mailed it in, would they honor it?
Probably not. And there was a postcard in there someone had used as a bookmark. And it says, The Flying Fish Trip, Santa Catalina, California. Unused postcard. It's perfect condition. It's been in this book probably since 1958.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's just it. So now you're going back and thinking, who was that?
Yeah.
Who did that stuff? I have to tell you, I have been oppressed by history recently. Just
good.
No. And personal history. So everything has been hitting me more and more. I don't know why. Probably because I'm getting extremely old. But just thinking about my grandparents, and every place I drive, I'm thinking about what happened there and how things are different. And, wondering about the people that built the stuff that I'm driving over. Wondering about what they were like. And nobody cares about them. We're very focused on what happened yesterday and maybe what's going to happen tomorrow. But all of those people, the 99.9% of humans that have ever existed who are dead, they risk being forgotten. Well, when they're forgotten, they're gone. Yeah. And I've told you, I probably mentioned on the podcast, at our particular funeral service, I get to sing the funerals. I say I get to. Because somebody needs to do it. It needs to be done. It is an honorable thing to do. And the last thing we sing for these people as we close the casket and take them out is eternal memory. Grant, O Lord, eternal memory. You're asking God to remember them, because if God doesn't remember them, ultimately no one will. So I think I probably like this book a bit better. So I want to give 2 paragraphs on this. So this is at the end of the South Pacific chapter, which is the first chapter, after he's talking about all these different people, about Tony Fry and Dr. Benaway and Luther Billis, all these strange characters you get in this book. He says, they will live a long time, these men of the South Pacific. They had an American quality. They, like their victories, will be remembered as long as our generation lives. After that, like the men of the Confederacy, they will become strangers. Longer and longer shadows will obscure them until their Guadalcanal sounds distant on the ear like Shiloh and Valley Forge. So the book, I think, is trying to capture at least Mitchener's view, and Mitchener has his viewpoint. Mitchener's view of what humans are like that ought to be remembered. Somebody ought to know there was somebody like Luther Billis, even if he's a fictional character. I'm sure there was a bunch of him. Mm-hmm. I want to go to the page 350. So there's a fictionalized landing that they're going to do here. Maybe it was Okinawa in real life. I knew a lady whose kid had died at Okinawa briefly. So she was 100 years old when I met her. And is the only thing she could talk about. She couldn't remember anything that you said to her day after day. But she'd remember her boy who was 18 years old on Okinawa. And so on page 350, it's the chapter called Frisco, where they're on the troop ship and they're all talking about the stupid things they did in San Francisco when they last had leave, and how the one guy spent $180 on a girl for 4 days, and he thought it was good money, better than gambling. Somebody slept through it. I did that once. I was on a band trip. We got up to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and everybody went out, and I was so tired I just slept in the hotel. I missed it.
That's what I would do.
Yeah. I would have been the guy who missed it. And then it says in the last paragraph, as assault party, prepare to land, prepare to land. When the smoky room was emptied, I went on deck. In the gray twilight of D-Day, the first wave was going in. Fire raked them as they hit the coral. Jap guns roared in the gray dawn. But some of them got in. They were in. And now the battleships lay silent. The airplanes withdrew. Men, human beings on 2 feet, men crawling on their bellies over coral with minds and doubtful thoughts and terrible longings. Men took over. So who was it that went and fought all of these battles that you should have learned about in history? It was people like my neighbor.
Yeah. Right after Charity and I got married, is this book, are we ever going to talk about the book?
Yeah, we'll get to it. I got notes.
After Charity and I got married, we got a little house here in Tulsa, and on the corner up the street from us, every Friday there were a bunch of cars parked up there, and I drove by and saw that they had the front window open, the front shades open. I could see in, and there were people playing cards in there, and they did it every Friday. And one day I just walked up and knocked on the door and said, "Are you guys playing bridge in there? I would like to learn how to play bridge." And the lady that answered the door said, "That's actually my husband's poker game, but we do play bridge. Come up here at 5:30 on Wednesdays, and we will teach you." And that was Tom and Elva McEwen, McKewon. Tom was in the 2nd Marine Division. He enlisted, typical story, December 8th, December 9th, something like that. And he did every single amphibious landing with the 2nd Marine Division. I just looked it up. It was Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Tinian, Okinawa. And he would tell some of these stories about crawling up the beach out of an Amtrak and crawling up the beach through the coral and it ripping their clothes off of them. He was on Tarawa for several weeks, and their clothes would just rot off of their bodies. Ahead of their first landing, I don't remember a lot of his stories, but ahead of their first landing, well, actually, I think his first landing, he did it with a 1903 Springfield bolt-action rifle. It would have been, and then I think it was his second one. They got issued M1s, and they sighted those brand new M1 rifles on the boat. And he said he got in the landing craft. It came to a halt. They dropped the ramp. He jumped out. Finally, he shouldered that rifle and pulled the trigger. It went bang. Never fired another round because when he went in, the recess behind the bolt filled up with sand, and he couldn't get it cleared, and he threw that rifle down. He told me what the serial number was. He still remembered it. He was 86 years old, and it had happened, 55 years earlier or something. And later on, he found another M1, and he said it was worn out. The barrel was worn out. It wouldn't hold a zero, and he told me what that serial number was. Later on, he got dementia, and I have an M1. And I brought it up. He would call me at 10 o'clock on Christmas morning and say, "Elva will let me drink before lunch. Would you come down? I'll build us one," he would say. So I would come up there at 10 in the morning. He would build he drank old fashions, bourbon old fashions, and he would build one. And I had an M1 and I brought it up there, and he had dementia, and he tore it completely apart on the kitchen table, put it all back together, went through the whole manual of arms, and it was perfect. The guy went on to become a mechanical engineer. He went to the University of Oklahoma. He got married. He had 2 children, was a very successful engineer, and lived a very, very good life. But I think the rest of it paled. Colors were never as bright. Life was never as sharp after that. I had a Toyota and a Mercedes at that time, and he could not understand why I would drive a Japanese or a German car. They were remarkable. We played bridge with them every Wednesday for years and years and years until they could no longer. But that's who did it.
Yes. So the book is stories of people like that. Mitchener does have a jaundiced eye, I think. I think he's a skeptic, probably. I've read some of his other novels. I think that's more than a probably.
Yeah.
But still, it's a person who likes people, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure he has an affinity for them. I think he's fascinated by them.
Yeah, well, novelist-like. Novelists who tend to be the sort of people who sit in the room and are sketching you out to be a character.
Yeah, that's sort of that mid-century American thing that I don't like. Have you read The Naked and the Dead, the Mailer novel?
I have not.
That was written in published in 1948. Tales of the South Pacific, The Naked and the Dead, and Catch-22 all sort of have that. They would probably tell you that they have a gritty, realistic depiction of the human character here, but I think it's a kind of a nasty, cynical look at the human character here.
I want to put a different spin on it. I would say it's a bit of alienation. So I've read a bunch of Walker Percy novels, and they're written slightly after this. The first one, The Moviegoer, it's a guy who he doesn't know how to be a real human being, so he has to go watch movies. Mm-hmm. Everything changes so fast. If some of these characters had stayed at home, I forget the character. There's so many characters in here, you forget who they are, but there's some people that find out that they are dissatisfied with their marriages while they're off in the tropics. And there's a line in here, something about, had he stayed at home and this had never happened, he probably never would have figured out that there was an emptiness in his marriage. Well, I don't know if that's quite the way it works. I think it's probably that the traveling made there be one.
Yep. I have come to not like travel, Karl. So
I've noticed.
Our friend Matt Reynolds, I was on the Barbell Logic podcast, my first podcast home for many hundreds of episodes with him. And we got an
excellent podcast, by the way.
Well, thank you. We got an argument on the show one time about Wagyu beef, or how do you say that?
That sounds good to me.
That Japanese beef where they massage the cow and feed it beer and love on it, and it's supposedly delicious. Well, Reynolds came through Tulsa one time, and he said, let's go eat dinner. And I said, man, I can't. He said, well, that's fine. I'll go catch dinner. I'll see you in the morning. Well, I saw him the next morning. He said, oh, my gosh, I went to Bodine's here in Tulsa and had Wagyu beef. He said, have you ever had that? It's wonderful. I said, no, I've not had it. He said, the price is really good. He said it was $70 for a 10-ounce thing, I think is what it was. He said, for as far as that goes, that's cheap. It was delicious. He's like, you got to go do that. I was like, I will never eat that stuff. I will never eat it because I'm afraid it's better than the steak I buy at Sam's Club. Right? Like, what if I eat that and now I think that the ribeye I get from Sam's Club is no good? Now what am I going to do? That's what travel does.
Yeah. So you live in Spillsville, Iowa.
Is that real?
It is, actually. So we're going to do a podcast after this about string quartets at our other show, which is currently called Music and Ideas, which you ought to go listen to. Dvorak, the composer, came and he lived in Spillsville, Iowa for a summer and wrote music there. And I looked it up. There's a population of 327 in the last census. If you grew up in Spillsville, it's probably objectively a pretty good life. You find the prettiest girl in Spillsville and you marry her and you run your farm or your auto parts store or whatever, and you raise babies. And everything's good. But in the middle of that, and it would have been good, but now you're called off, you're drafted even, and you're sent off to the South Pacific, and you see palm trees and pineapples and volcanoes and ocean and native girls, Polynesian and Melanesian and Tonkinese who are from China, who are friendlier than you're used to American girls being. You eat strange food. And how do you go back to Iowa? So what was objectively good now has some of the shine taken off of it because you got to see, like, to live in a crazed fantasy land for a while. You're a transplanted plant.
Yep, that ain't good. I'm like, I will never eat one of those steaks.
Well, we could argue with this. Isn't it good to broaden your perspective?
No. Well, not necessarily. Right? There's perspective, and then putting yourself in a position to be covetous for the rest of your days. I can't have that steak. Well, heck, I can't eat the ribeye every day. What are they, $10 a pound now? $11? I don't know what they are now. But I can't have that every day even. But I don't want to put myself in a position to be more covetous than I already am.
Yeah. Well, you didn't have a choice if you were born 1925.
Right. Yeah. So is it Dr. Benaway?
Yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Benaway, he's an officer, and one of his duties is to censor letters from his soldiers that are going to their loved ones,
Yeah, that's a funny story.
I think it's wonderful. I think it's one of the most interesting parts of the book. So Benaway is sitting down at his desk, and he's going to write a letter to his wife. I think it's Lenore, which, Edgar Allan Poe wrote some poems to Lenore. I thought that was probably on purpose. So, no, Harbison writes a letter to his wife, Lenore. I'm sorry. No, Harbison's a piece of garbage. He's a terrible person. Harbison is Troy from Jayber Crow in World War II. But Benaway is writing a letter to his wife, and he's just not really happy with how he's expressing himself to his wife. And then he gets this letter of just fabrication and florid bullshit from Bill Harbison to his wife. And he reads it, and he realizes that he's not able to express himself to his wife the way he'd like to. And then he starts to, wonder just what the heck is their relationship. He knew, and every officer in the camp knew, that Bill Harbison was having a serious girl trouble in the South Pacific. Anyway, so this guy is sleeping around all over the South China Sea and still writes these letters. So Benaway tries again. He wads his letter up and tries again to write another one, and then tries again to write another one. And he's never really able to say to his wife the kinds of things that he would like to say. And he doesn't even know what those are exactly. But being exposed to all these things, he's not able to just have the relationship with his wife he wants to have, because when he's forced through his duties to read the words of one husband to another wife, he can covet their relationship. Not the other man's wife, but he can covet their relationship. Otherwise, Benaway and his wife would just have the marriage that they had.
Mm-hmm.
I've often thought, like, pornography is so gross. And even a lot of these movies, romance movies, are gross. Like, I've thought, how nice would it be to be some sodbuster in like 1859 in the middle of Kansas, and you meet Susie when you're 14, and you get married when you're 16 and a half, and you go and you make a life together, and you guys would just have the relationship that you had. And you would just have the sexuality that you have, and there would be nothing to compare it to. It would be exactly what it should be out of the necessity between the two of you. You would have nothing to strive for except what you both strove for. It would just be completely organic, Oh, what a beautiful opportunity that would be.
But how narrow must your life have been?
Who cares? It's you and Susie, and, you guys have got what you want.
This is like Riders of the Purple Sage. This is the Eden story.
Yeah.
Lots of us would have eaten the apple. Note, the Bible does not say it was an apple, the fruit, because we would get bored.
I'm going to call Reynolds when we get off here. I'm going to tell him that he was tempting me with with that fruit.
Well, yeah, but the fact is it happened. They ate the thing. Yeah. They sent all of our ancestors, or many of our ancestors, off to the South Pacific. Mine mostly missed. Mine were in between wars. Had a great uncle who was in World War II setting up radar installations. Took him the rest of his life to get there was a medal he should have gotten that he didn't get, and it took him the rest of his life to get it. But the fact is they did it. They sent him out there. I was just thinking, if you read your Augustine, which you would at some point if you're in Online Great Books, year 11, you'll read Augustine.
Mm-hmm.
And it is curiosities of vice for him. which is weird for modern people because we think, well, no, I can't stay in my hometown. I got to go. I got to see stuff. Why do you have to see stuff? Well, you have to see stuff because you're dissatisfied with what you have. And the problem is it doesn't make that better. It makes you more dissatisfied with what you have.
Yes. Yeah. It turns life into a consumer good, right? It's not something you do, but I've got to go obtain this. I've got to go experience that. I've got to do that.
Yeah.
It turns life into a theme park. Patooey.
Yeah. So, well, they had to go. They were made to go. They had to go. They did their duty, most of them, bravely. But it changes everything, you know. Another reason why I like this book, I've read a bunch of World War II stuff. The reason I like it is because they are recognizable to me. I don't know if the kids today, if they're recognizable to them. But the people that are at Omaha Beach, the people that are at Guadalcanal, I recognize them. They're people like me. They live in a world substantially like mine. Whereas if you read Civil War stuff, which you also ought to read, dear listener, don't forget about that one. Those people were not quite like us, at least not like me. Scratching away on a farm, they seem different to me. And if you go further back, they're even more different. But this war, I think it's really modern, and these people have modern concerns, and you could put yourself in their place and say, yeah, I know what that's like. I want to read a bit from, this is page 15. There's this gentleman, Lieutenant Grant. He's giving a toast. He's from New Zealand. And they've just had, I think, the Battle of the Coral Sea.
Confusion to Robespierre.
Yeah, that's not quite the toast. But, well, the toast is to the men who won the victory. So that's on the previous page. I believe a toast is in order, an American officer said. We stood and he proposed to an Allied victory. Americans and New Zealanders congratulated him on the felicity of his thought. Another American jumped to his feet immediately. To the men who won the victory, he said in a voice filled with emotion. Who did it? And then Grant, on the next page, he rose to his feet. He started to speak. Surprised, we stopped to listen. We knew he was drunk, but not how drunk. Today, he began in a thick voice, today will undoubtedly be remembered for years to come. As the gentleman from Australia so properly observed, this is one of the... And then he stops. He can't say anymore. And he says, if you have not been to New Zealand, he began, and then lost that sentence too. If you were a New Zealander, he started over with a rush, you would know what this means. He took a deep breath and began speaking very slowly, emphasizing each word. We were ready to protect the land with all our energy. His voice trailed off. We looked at one another uneasily. Why are they so uneasy? From the oldest man to the youngest boy we would have fought. It was my humble duty to assist in preparing the defenses of Auckland. I issued several thousand picks, crowbars, and axes. There were no other weapons. He reached for his whiskey, took a long, slow drink. My wife, he resumed, was given the job of mobilizing the women. I urged her to go to the hills. In fact, I ordered her to go, but she said that our 2 children... And then it stops. What he's saying is they were looking at... You know, everybody knew what the Japanese, or at least they probably should have known what the Japanese did in Manchuria.
Nanking.
Yeah. It was not going to be good for you if they managed to beat you. He's giving people picks, crowbars, and axes to defend their homeland. Those are high stakes.
Yep.
That's where it's a little hard to imagine, as I live in the northeast corner of Illinois, and we're not fearing invasion. Yeah, I mean, these are people ripped from their homes, alienated, everything's weird now, but why did they go? Well, for some of them, at least for the New Zealanders, there's a real threat.
What about the shoemaker from, where was he from? Ohio?
Which guy?
I can't remember which one it was. There's too many of them.
There's a whole lot of characters, and it's because it's not a novel. Characters come in and they drop out. I mean, it's hard to keep track. I don't know. There was a heartbreaking story. It's in a chapter called Dry Rot. Ugh. Lonely Joe. Joe has this boring, terrible job on some tiny island. I don't think he's even kissed a girl. And Luther Billis finds this out and starts to have girls write to him.
Yeah, that's the one.
And he's got all this longing, and it's just a miracle that somebody would write to him. The first girl, Essie Schultz from Perkasie, Pennsylvania. Dear Joe, please excuse me for writing when we haven't been introduced, but my good friend, Mr. Luther Billis... How does Luther Billis know everybody? He's got a stable of ladies that he can just have write to people.
Yeah.
Told me that you didn't have any girl to write to. I write letters to 17 sailors and 1 soldier. I think you boys are the bravest men in America. And so she goes on, and he falls in love with her, but then she gets married to another soldier. And then we have another girl, Alice Baker from Corvallis. I don't know where Corvallis is. 18, a senior in high school, writes him a letter. Ensign Billis said you were slow, but I like slow boys. Some of the boys in Corvallis are so fast, they think if they look at a girl, she falls in love with him. Picture me is pretty much the way I look. Sincerely, Alice Baker. And he falls in love with her, looks at her picture 10 times a day. It brings joy to his life. It brings meaning to... This is what men are for, falling in love with Alice Baker. And then Mitchener just does a dirty trick on us. And maybe it happened, and that's the only excuse I can say for it, is that Alice Baker had been killed in an auto accident. He gets the news from the chaplain. He never even met this girl. And now everything that Luther had done for him just goes away. Your heart breaks reading this stuff. This is a hard book for me to read.
Yeah.
If you have a heart and you think, these are most likely fictionalized versions of real people. And if there wasn't Joe from Ohio, there was somebody like Joe from Ohio.
Yeah, and then they just drop Joe.
Yeah, poor Joe.
The story does.
Well, Joe might have ended up dead at Curlay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a collection of short stories, and it's meandering. See, that's another thing. It's got that, I'll just say, Pulp Fiction kind of thing, right? They introduces a character, and you don't see him for a while, and they come back 75, 80 pages later. It doesn't necessarily tell the story backwards like that, but it's not linear. I think the structure of the book is sort of a character of the thing as well in the thing. And I don't need that. I don't need that.
It's too modern for you.
Just give me the story. Don't let's not gild the lily. Just give me the story.
I get it, but I think I know why he's doing it is because
lay this on me. I can't wait.
Well, no, the experience of being there is the whole bunch of characters. So this is why if you watch the musical South Pacific, which I've seen a few times, I saw it in person before the current crisis, it's not the same as the book.
This is a dark book.
It's got good music, but it takes a bunch of these characters and squashes them together to make it be more of a novel. It works as a musical, but this you feel like 100 people after you get done with the book, and maybe you do. I get it. I know why he did it. I don't hate it.
I don't hate it either, but I won't throw a but in there. I don't hate it either. But it's distinct. There's the but. It's distinctly mid-century. It's got that same stink on it that those other books I mentioned. Catcher in the Rye, my least favorite book in the world.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. That those stories of alienation.
Well, what was going on in the mid-century?
Everything. Nothing.
Complete upheaval?
Yeah. Deep modernity. I get it. I get it.
Well, we're worse now.
We're postmodernity now, right? Yeah, I get how alienating things can be, but when I pick up a book, that's not good times for me.
Mm-hmm. Should we talk about Nelly?
Yeah, good old Nelly.
Nelly Forbush.
She's trying.
Well, she's also a plant that has been transplanted. Well, it's in this chapter about Bill Harbison. Bill Harbison is, if there's a villain, I think it's Bill Harbison.
Yeah, he's a POS.
What'd you call him? He's like the Troy from the Jaber Crow book. Yeah. But there's some really good writing in the characterization. Let's see. So this is bottom of 41 in our edition. Inwardly, Bill admitted that he was good. He had ample reason to think so. In college, he'd been the master athlete. He'd played basketball in the Mountain States, where the game is rough and fast. His height and grace made him a star. The 6 times he appeared in Madison Square Garden, he outshone the competition. He was a crack tennis player, a bit of a golfer, a wizard at table tennis, and a good first baseman. In his studies, he was also quite a man. Not an honor student, but he got far more A's than C's. He was a member of the best fraternity, a welcome guest at the sororities, a popular man among the younger set in Denver, Salt Lake, and Albuquerque. He was, in short, the kind of man the Navy sought. He was an officer and a gentleman. In Albuquerque, Harbison married the daughter of a wealthy family. She was a Vassar graduate and found Bill a fine combination of dashing Western manhood and modest cultural attainment. He at least knew what the Atlantic Monthly was. That was more than could be said for the rest of her suitors, and he could write the sweetest letters.
The Atlantic is still like the bellwether for being a modern...
I, too, know what the Atlantic is.
Yeah, I do, too.
I've read a couple of their articles on accident. I think he's actually combined with Joe Cable in the musical a little bit. But he gets to the South Pacific, and, the wife's far away, and, well, he's always gotten everything he wants, so...
Why stop now?
Why stop now? And so he starts finding lady friends. And eventually, one of them is Nelly Forbush.
Sounds like a Bond girlfriend.
Yeah, it does. First, it was Dinah. Dinah's a bit older. The next was Nelly Forbush. This is page 53. So she's a slender, pretty nurse of 22. She came from a small town in Arkansas and loved being in the Navy. Never in 100 years would Bill Harbison had noticed her in the States. So I'll pause right there. So here's another thing that was uprooted. So small town girl from Arkansas is not in the same circle as Bill Harbison, and good for her. Good for her. She never would have known what the Atlantic was. Probably would have been happy, maybe, back in Arkansas. So the class differences are erased, which still exist. But you take everybody and dump them in the South Pacific, and now they're not. And now you have somebody like Bill who thinks he can get whatever he wants from somebody like Nelly. In Albuquerque, she would have... Yeah, this is some funny stuff. So there's mid-century racial concerns in this book, too. In Albuquerque, she would have lived near the Mexican quarter. But on the island of Efate, where the white women were the exception and pretty white women rarities, Nelly Forbush was a queen. So, small-town girl is now the best thing on the island. Danger, danger. Bill makes advances, and they're pretty forceful advances. She should have shot him. And there was a line in there I thought was interesting. So there's no women out there. There's only Native women. There's very few women. There are nurses who show up, but there are some strange restrictions on them. So this is on page 54. Cut off by law from fraternizing with those men who would like to marry them, and who would have married them in civilian life, they find their friendship restricted to men who are surprisingly often married who are social snobs. So here's the rule. If you're a nurse in the Navy, you're an officer. So she's Lieutenant Nelly Forbush or whatever her rank was. Which means you can't fraternize with the enlisted men. But the enlisted men are the sorts of people you would have married back home. And the officers are the sorts of people that never would have talked to you. And if they did, they would have used you for a one-night stand.
Wow.
And so it's no wonder she marries the Frenchman. I guess what I'm saying, the social experiment aspect of this, you've uprooted everybody and thrown them together, and it's rough.
Wait a minute. So what you're saying is...
What am I saying?
World War II was a social experiment?
No, I don't know. World War II was a great big horrible mess that can be considered in hindsight as the aspect of a social experiment. I don't think necessarily they started the war in order to uproot Nelly Forbush. I have no information on that. I don't know. The displacement and alienation are a desirable side effect for some people, maybe. No, I don't know about World War II. World War I, I'm pretty darn sure we shouldn't have gone. Don't think we had any reason. But that was Woodrow Wilson.
Double dub. Yeah, Bill's nasty. But she meets the rogue planter.
Emile de Beck.
Yeah.
Who is also not quite like the movie. He's a little more noble in the movie. Much more noble, because they combine him with that Anderson person, the remittance man. He's a French planter. There have been a lot of... If you were a nurse, you better go out with somebody with a revolver, because you have all these enlisted men who can't find a girl, and it's not safe. And there was a line on 111 that I liked. It says, out here, good people seem to get better and bad people seem to get worse. I think Nelly is speaking on that. I think that was probably true.
Yeah, they're in a pressure cooker.
And then we meet Emile de Beck. He's got a gold tooth. I thought that was funny. He is a de Gaulleist, not a Petanist.
Yeah, I like that.
What does he say? Something he doesn't actually like. He doesn't actually like de Gaulle. He thinks he's terrible, but this is on 114. But why, a doctor asked, did you elect to follow de Gaulle in particular? De Gaulle? The Frenchman asked contemptuously. I wish I could do a French accent. What's de Gaulle? Can you do one?
No.
Who cares what de Gaulle is? He looks puffed up to me. I don't like him. He snorted and waved his hands. Ah, he added, but what de Gaulle stands for, what decent man could do otherwise? So it's not the actual de Gaulle that he supports. It's French freedom. Gosh, I don't know what to say about de Beck. He's quite a character.
He says, you Americans worry about de Gaulle and de Gaulleist, and yet every one of you acts as if he were a de Gaulleist. Your speeches and your actions don't coincide. He's a principled guy. He killed a man.
With a knife.
He stabbed a dude who needed it and fled France and went out to the provinces here. So he's a man capable of great violence. He's a man of power and action. But he's principled, and Nelly digs it. He's got a bunch of kids, though. He's been fertilizing the local flowers for quite some time.
But at least he's not married. See, Harbison was married.
Right.
De Beck is not married, and he has made a plantation, a lovely plantation that he's built on his own. It's got these, he has this little useless shed in the cacao grove just to go sit out there. So he's a romantic. I don't know. He's a neat character, but he does have a problem. He has some things that wouldn't play in Arkansas. I don't know. What makes her change her mind? She can't get married. He's got children of color.
Yes. She's born 1920 Arkansas. He's got weird kids to her way of thinking. So she flees him, and then she decides to get married to the guy back home, right?
Mm-hmm. Charlie Benedict.
But she decides to marry him. It's weird.
Well, okay, so let's follow this out. So obviously the thing that is driving her away from de Beck is her racial preoccupations, because he has race mixed, and she's not up with that. Yeah, she doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, so this has got all that mid-century stuff in there that you can't say now because we live in a neo-puritanical society. So we're not going to say any of those words that she says in here, but you should go read them, and you shouldn't be completely and entirely freaked out because that was sort of the way of the world, and there's nothing I can do about it sitting here in 2020. What are we supposed to do, not talk about the book?
Well, we could ban the book like they banned Huckleberry Finn, and then you miss Huckleberry Finn's a much better book, but you can ban it, not talk about it, or you can read it and realize this is written in 46, and there were a bunch of Nelly Forbushes around. She's got to go back to Charlie Benedict, and then she looks back at that article they'd written about her in the Arkansas paper, our heroine who was going to go and see the world. So this is on top of 133. Nurse Forbush caught a fleeting glimpse of herself in the clipping. She thought of that afternoon that the picture had arrived in Ottoloosa. Is it really in Ottoloosa?
I don't know.
I didn't look it up. I want to see the world, Charlie. I want to live with people. The ridiculousness of her situation amused her. She started laughing at Dinah, then she laughed at herself. The two nurses caught one another by their arms and started dancing. She makes a decision because she's displaced, or she wants to be. She wants to leave Arkansas, and so she doesn't care about the kids. And now she comes up with reasons. Perhaps the kids were charming. They were. Once she makes a decision, I mean, de Beck's kids are pretty awesome, actually.
Multilingual, super gorgeous daughters, and well-behaved. And they're grown, too, by the way. I think the oldest one, or the youngest one's...
Well, there's the 15-year-old that marries a sergeant.
Yeah, there's one that's 15 and on up. So it's not like she's going to have to raise some.
Goodbye, Charlie. And hello, Emile. And she goes back up, and they get married.
I'm all right with that. So, we got to talk about Harbison. Harbison's hanging around these nurses. And he takes up with, I'm going to call her the chief nurse, Dinah.
Mm-hmm.
Dinah. And she's 41. And
so old.
Yeah, they go on picnics and do grown people picnic stuff. And everybody's wide-eyed about it. Like, she knows what's going on, and he knows what's going on. He doesn't wear his wedding ring, and he doesn't tell anybody he's married, but he doesn't tell him he's not either. And she knows something's up, and she knows it's war, and she's 41, right?
Yes, it would have been less objectionable for him to just hang out with Dinah.
Right. But that falls apart, and I don't remember why. There's a lot. God, there's 47 plots in this book. I can't remember why it falls apart. But after it falls apart, he starts calling her grandma. I would kill him with an axe handle.
I'd talk to Emil and get the knife.
Knife's too quick. That alone made me hate him.
Yeah, I think you're supposed to. I think if you read a bunch of Mitchener, there's little bits like that. I think he's good at characterization. He does have the mid-century world weariness of a lot of American literature back then, but boy, is he good. I mean, I think as a writer, he's really good. Yeah. You feel like you know these people the moment that you see them. Harbison turns out to, at the end of the book, he had claimed that he wanted to go fight, be transferred up to the forward lines, and then somehow as soon as he saw what it was going to be, he chickened out and managed to get himself sent back home. But people like Tony Fry and Joe Cable and everybody else died. It's a hard book in that way. Nelly's got a really small part in the book. She's got a huge part in the musical.
Yeah.
She shows up in 2 chapters, and then she's done.
They're good chapters. Joe Cable, he's kind of a hero, but he's a boring hero. He's very straight-laced. He does things properly mostly. He's a good officer, a good junior officer. Benny Atterbury is his name. I can't remember. It's too many characters. There's a guy who's charged with making sure that everyone, not just the soldiers, but all the locals as well, take their Atterbury tablets because they are trying to prevent a malaria outbreak in the area. Atterbury is nasty oral medication. The guy would, I guess he had a license to travel around. So he get a little boat and a little staff, and he could go over to this island and that island over there and whatever. And the natives all line up, and he'd give them their medication. And a little bit of a huckster. They'd trade stuff, those shrunken heads, for some cloth or, whatever they needed. And he takes Joe Cable, this straight-laced junior grade lieutenant, with him. And while he's there, his friend, Tonkinese woman, beetle nut chewing Bloody Mary, introduces him to her stunning 17-year-old Tonkinese daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Bloody Mary is 51, I think he said. 51, 55 years old, something like that. Knows all the English cuss words.
Because the Marines think it's funny to teach them to her.
Yep. She likes Joe, and she wants her daughter to marry Joe.
Yeah.
She is not from a culture with Christian Moors.
No, she sets them up. This is go in that hut, and there's Liat, that's her name.
Kynes? Like in Dune.
Oh, sorry.
She's a piping hot 17-year-old caramel-skinned island girl.
Well, no, so we could talk about that a little bit. So Tonkin, I guess it's Tonkin Bay? I don't know. It's like...
Yeah, like the Gulf of Tonkin, like that whole Vietnam...
I was trying to work out the equation. So ultimately it's not going to work because the Joe just can't make it work. He can't get himself to marry her. What would they think in Philadelphia? And so you have a hierarchy. The white people are at the top. The French people, I guess, count as that. And then...
I guess, Karl said...
The Tonkinese are below them. The Tonkinese are imported Chinese laborers. They come in and they work like indentured servants, I guess, and then they go back home to China and they're rich. So what is it? Bloody Mary's got $2,000 or something.
Yeah.
She's going to be rich. And then below that's like Polynesians and Melanesians, and I don't know who's at the bottom. But there's this social structure on these islands.
New Zealanders?
It's why Nelly couldn't marry DeBeck until she could.
Yeah. See, all that mid-century class, upstairs, downstairs bullshit. It's gross.
Well, but it was there.
Yeah, I know.
It was there. So, a character like Joe, you're going to read it and maybe you're going to say how evil he was. And, well, what is he, from Princeton? He's Joe from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
He's from upper class Philadelphia. Like, this is Grace Kelly's people. It's the way it was.
Yeah.
He should have married her. So you contrast him with Tony Fry. So Joe, eventually, he can't marry her. He loves her dearly, but he can't marry her. She gets a little bit of a happy ending, I guess. She gets to marry some big fat French planter. So she's moving up in the world. She's moved up the scale. See, she's marrying a Frenchman. And maybe she'll do okay. So I guess she has a happy ending. And Bloody Mary, she gets a gift of a watch from Joe Cable. And at the end of the chapter, Mary just throws the watch down and breaks it. He missed his chance. He could have had marital happiness for a little while. But of course, he dies on the beach at Curle. Right? And maybe he could have had babies and something to live on and remember him, but he didn't. Tony Fry falls in love with Latouche Lebec, and it's absurd, right? But he demands that they be married. He gets like the narrator, who's never named, to be the best man. And that's another weird thing about the book. It's narrated first person sometimes, but you never quite know who the first person is. So it's James Mitchener.
One point in the book, towards the end, the first person, I think it was Bus.
Yeah, at one point it was Bus who was the first person. But I don't think that's the whole time
either.
of the book. So Tony marries Latouche in a secret ceremony. They get married. Well, he was married. He had achieved what men are supposed to achieve. So the both of them die. The both of them each, as my wife's people would say. They both die on the beach. Who did better?
Fry?
I think so.
But what about his wife?
No, Fry wasn't married.
I'm sorry. Fry married Latouche, right?
Yeah, Fry married Latouche. What about Latouche? Well,
Fry did better.
Yeah.
Right. But what about his wife, though? I mean, now he's got there's this widow out there.
Oh, she's going to do all right. She engineered the death of her first husband, which is a little bit of a funny story. She was married to, I forget his name, Achille. There isn't Achilles in this, wasn't that his name?
Achille, yeah.
It's weird that the French have people named Achilles. France is so weird.
What about Aristotle and Onassis? What about that?
That's a great name.
Aristotle. He's literally abusive. People say that now. Like if a spouse says, no, we're not going to do that. Nowadays, that means abusive.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's so controlling. But no, this guy would beat you. This guy would beat your ass. He was abusive.
Yeah, and so I forget the details, but she sets it up so that he comes in and is ready to kill, and he gets killed instead.
Yeah, he's gonna beat her with an ironwood club, and she ends up shooting him. But they set up the whole. She and Fry set up the whole situation that they knew would enrage him and would cause him to. I don't know if it would cause that he would react to by being violent and give her an excuse to blow him away, and she does. It's deemed self-defense, which it was, and she and Fry lived the next 61 days happily ever after, or whatever it is. It's not very long.
I mean, that had he not gone to the South Pacific, well, it wouldn't have been Latouche. But I'm going to tell you something about the human male. We just want to fall in love and get married and have families. That there's this meme out there like men only want one thing and it's disgusting. And then it shows like the white picket fence and the family.
Yeah.
I think Tony did okay. I mean, circumstances, I don't know, about the last time you see Tony happy is, this is on 320. On Sunday, the ship came to take us north. I hurried out to the plantation to get Fry. I found him sitting on a bench among the flowers. Latouche in a skimpy brassiere and shorts lay with her head in his lap. He was reading Chinese lay to her. I don't know what that is. He's happy. Happy as a clown. That's all he wanted.
It's pretty good. Latouche, by the way, is Nelly's daughter-in-law. stepdaughter-in-law, right?
Yeah. I kept waiting for Nelly to show up in that part of the story, but she didn't.
Yeah, the Latouche story, the Liette story, and the Forbush story are all have parallels. The forbidden love.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real live war novel towards the end.
Yeah, so they set this up back in the chapter called Alligator. Operation Alligator. There's a mythical island of Curle, whatever it was actually supposed to be. One day in November 1942, a group of admirals met in Navy building in Washington. So these are people far from the action. They progressed to other considerations. Toward the end of the meeting, the officer who was serving as improvised chairman said, "We will take Curle." It was a preposterous decision. But now that's what the whole group of people out there have to do. The decision made thousands and thousands of miles away.
Yeah, made at the Pentagon.
Yeah. Did we have the Pentagon then?
I think so. Around that time.
It says the Navy building.
It's getting close.
But it's parallel to other decisions that Mitchener mentions. Like people in Russia would make similar crazy decisions. People in Europe would say, well, when we have driven Rommel out of Tunisia, we'll land upon Sicily. That battle up Italy, that was some bad stuff. Very easy to dream up in an office. Very, very hard to do in reality.
Ground was broken for construction of the Pentagon on September 11th, 1941. Boom, boom.
September 11th.
And the building was dedicated on January 15th of 43.
So not yet.
Not yet. 3.7 million square feet.
Biggest office building in the world. It has a train inside of it, I think.
It says here, is one of the world's largest office buildings.
I don't know if you'll enjoy this. There's a book by, there's a book called The Illuminati Trilogy. An incredibly entertaining, crazy, sort of science fiction book by Robert Anton Wilson and Michael Shea. Basically, the plot is every conspiracy theory is true. It's funny. There's a parallel Ayn Rand in the book. Her book is not Atlas Shrugged, it's Telemachus Sneezed.
Yeah.
It's a very funny book, but the reason that the Pentagon is is because it's actually a pentagram.
Of course.
And there's something trapped in the middle. I thought that was entertaining. For the record, I am not saying that's true, but it's a strange shape for an office building. But I thought a line that gave some shape to the whole book, I think it's on page 107. Yeah, it's in the middle of the page. Each of the remaining bits of gossip in this book took place after the participants were committed to Curle. That is why, looking back upon them now, these men do not seem so foolish in their vanities, quarrels, and pretensions. They didn't know what was about to happen to them, and they were happy in their ignorance. This is the first third of the book. You know that there's going to be a serious advance, and that probably everybody's dead. Does it make their silly vanities, quarrels, and pretensions less or more important?
Both.
How can it be both?
Depends on how vain or pretentious you are.
So somebody like Dr. Benaway trying to figure out how to write a letter to his wife. And you skipped the best part of that story because there was this enlisted man who'd written the most purple X-rated letters to his wife.
Let's come back to that after we talked about the pretension thing, because it is wonderful.
But you can look at him and say, well, this is a silly concern to have because you're about to go and die. But on the other hand, you're about to go and die, and so nothing that you do is silly anymore. Right.
So for Herbison, keeping up his pretension and his narcissistic delusion became more urgent, I guess, up until the very end. Then he ran away.
He probably lived happily ever after.
He probably did.
And told people stories about what it was like in the South Pacific.
Yeah, we already saw one of the letters he wrote to his wife where he just lied about everything he did. Awful.
Yeah.
Awful. Dr. Benaway, we're going to go back to this letter. So great. Dr. Benaway, he's a doctor. I think he's a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Psychologist, whatever. And one of his fellow officers comes in and says, "Hey, I got this Hewitt kid keeps writing these letters, and just have a look at it for me."
and then walks out.
And this throws on his desk and splits.
Should you read a little bit of it?
Yeah, I was looking, what page is this on?
This is 223.
223. My own dearest, darlingest wife, how I miss you and how I long that you were here right beside me in this small and dark tent. What a time we would have, and how I would long to kiss you as you have never been kissed before. We would spend no punctuation, guys.
None.
No capitalization. It's a run-on sentence. It's just an urgent thing. And other things, if you know what I mean. And I'll bet you do. Ha ha.
Ha ha.
Wake up in the morning laughing, and everything would be fine, wouldn't it, my own darling, my adorable wife? When I get up in the morning, there is only an emptiness about my heart that never goes away all day long, even when I'm eating the awful chow they serve here, in which they call food for a fighting man. With me, it is like when I first saw you in Louisville that wonderful day 4 years ago. I can see you as plain as you was right here. But that's just where you are forever and forever, throughout all eternity, right here in my arms. And if I ever thought another day would dawn without you, with me forever, I would die right now. Okay, here we go. Plug your headphones in. I'm sitting in my tent as usual, thinking of you. I'm in my shorts, and as I had a haircut today, there are streaks of my hair all over my shorts, which looks very funny, I tell you. I know you would laugh if you were here, but tonight I am there with you, my adored darling, in whom I see everything good and kind that can ever be. I'm right here with you, and it's almost time for bed. You say, come on, Tim, let's go to bed. We've got to get up in the morning, and I laugh like always and say, I know what you want to go to bed for, and you laugh and say, you don't talk like that. And Tim, and I catch you and pull you over the Davenport and start to take off your stockings, and you squeal and wiggle and say, turn out the lights, Tim. What will the neighbors think? And I finish undressing you. You turn out the lights, and we are all there alone in the darkness, but I can see you very well for a little light that comes in from the Abrams window. And there you are. Anyway, it just goes on and on.
Dr. Benaway was perspiring.
Yeah.
Young Hewitt's letter continued with an intimate description of his wife, her attributes, her various reactions, the manner in which she participated in sexual intercourse, and his own emotions throughout the act. The damn thing's absolutely clinical, he said to himself. He's a little
Every letter
bothered.
this young man sends home is like that.
Well,
So they think he's a danger.
X-rated letters to his lawfully wedded wife.
Yeah. So he comes in to be examined, really. Hewitt doesn't know what's going on.
Did you mention that the person who threw the letter at him was Harbison?
All right, Harbison. Yeah, POS.
Because they have to censor, they have to make sure that in your letter you don't say, yeah, we're getting ready for a big attack on so-and-so island. It's going to be hard, honey. Pray for me.
Yeah. Benaway says, it's about this letter. All of your letters, as a matter of fact. Hewitt reached for the letter. That's my letter, he protested. I know it is, Hewitt, and that's what I wanted to ask you about. What's wrong with it? It's to my wife. I didn't say nothing about no ships or nothing. Nobody said you did, Hewitt. The man breathed more easily and twirled the letter about in his hands. Hewitt, don't you see anything wrong with the letter? No, sir. There ain't a word about nothing. He says, "What? The last page, Hewitt. Don't you see anything strange about that? I mean, is that just an ordinary letter?" "Oh, no, sir. It's a letter to my wife." See, Hewitt is my 1851 Kansas man.
Yep.
He and his wife just have this thing they do. Benaway says, "What's your wife say about these letters, Hewitt?" "Bingo," that's what he calls her. "Why, she never says nothing, sir. Nothing I remember. Her letters to you, are they like that?" "Not exactly like that. I got one right here," he said suddenly. And before Benaway could stop him, he whipped out a sweaty wallet, produced a letter written in fine Southern hand. It was from Louisville. You can read it if you wish. You're just like a doctor, sort of. "Do you and your wife always write like that?" "Well, you might say so." It's great.
It's the way it should be.
Yeah, and Benaway says, a letter like that, and especially one like your wife's, is never written by a lady or a gentleman. It just isn't done. I should think you would have more respect for one another. That you might talk that way in your own bedroom is possible, but if you were to show that letter, either of them, around in the Navy, you could be court-martialed. "But, sir," Hewitt replied, "she's my wife. I'm married to her. That's not just a letter. It's to my wife."
Well, Benaway and Harbison are of a different class than Hewitt from Louisville.
Yep.
And probably they're worse for it.
Yeah, it's really nice, actually. Hewitt says, "When I went away to war, it all ended, and I didn't know how to write about it, and our letters were pretty much like the old women again. And then one night I was writing to her. I got to thinking about the swell times we used to have, especially on Wednesdays. And this was a Wednesday too. And I just sort of wrote exactly what I was feeling. And I just didn't give, if you excuse the expression, I just didn't give a good goddamn, if you'll excuse me, sir.
Yeah. And I like what Benaway does. Finally, he's like, I mean, there's nothing that Hewitt has done that's wrong. He says, fine, I'll tell you what, Hewitt, you mail all your letters right here from now on, will you? So bring it to the censor's office. I'll put it in the mail. I'm not going to read them. I might read one every once in a while, but I'm not going to read them. We'll bypass Harbison. We'll bypass everyone else. It's a real nice moment in the book. But he still doesn't know how to write to his wife.
Yeah. Especially now, you know? Like if he had any idea how to do it, after he sees Hewitt's letter, it's awesome. What if Hewitt married Forbush?
There would have been a lot of babies.
Right. Then you got MASH. You got Pierce in Honeycutt. Come on.
I used to like that show MASH when I was a kid. I don't think I would like it now. That show lasted like 8 times longer than the war that it was about.
Yeah. Well, was it about that war or was it about...
Well, the movie's set in Korea, but it's about Vietnam.
Of course. Yeah. Gosh, should we do a show about MASH?
Do we have to?
No. You know, I sat in on a little bit of your seminar over Caesar's War in Gaul. I'm weird, you know. And the guys in the seminar group were not as weird as me. And I was listening to them, and I don't do seminars as often as you do. I talk to you about these books more than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
We're probably too much alike for it to be as good as it could be.
How dare you, sir?
Right. And they had a very 20th, 21st century conception of war that I no longer share. This is probably going to get me hate mail. Sometime between 1914 and about 1948 or 49, people decided that war was categorically bad, and not only categorically bad, but unnatural.
Yes.
Listen, I can't imagine that war would ever be pleasant.
Well, and I have to say, I don't know anybody who's more anti-war than you.
Maybe.
Except maybe me.
I'm very anti-war. I verge on pacifist on Thursdays. But I realize that it's something that people do, and that there are some times when it must be done. And I do believe there are such things as just wars. We probably haven't seen one in a couple of centuries, but I do think that there is such a thing as a just war. MASH, I think, is part of that late 20th century, you know, post-Nuremberg conception that war is categorically bad. There's nothing noble or good about it, and it's unnatural. It is almost entirely an artifact of the state. The Pentagon, or whatever, you know.
It's a hell of a thing, but it's not unnatural.
Right.
If it were unnatural, we wouldn't do it so much.
Yeah. Strokes and heart attacks aren't unnatural either.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think seeing it as natural is not me condoning it, but I don't see it as an aberration in human behavior necessarily. It can be, but not necessarily.
Yeah, and the occasion of this, well, this is in Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar conquers all of France, all of Gaul. Our reaction to it is, well, that's mean.
Right.
And maybe it is, but that's a 21st century way of looking at it. I want to talk about the story of the boar's tooth. There was some bits and pieces in there that I thought were interesting. So Luther Billis, like he's kind of fat. He never wears a shirt. He's got tattoos all over. He's got an earring. He's got a boar's tusk around his arm. He's the king of the South Pacific.
A modern day pirate, kind of.
Like he's like the guy in Apocalypse Now if he was happy.
Right.
And so on this island, they have a ritual. Their religious practice is they take pigs and they stake them out so that the pig can't move. This is Heart of Darkness with a happy twist. Right. And so you take the male, I guess the male pigs, and you don't let him use his tusks so that they keep growing, and they grow into a circle. It's not happy for the pig because it's going to curve around and pierce right back through the mouth. And in the end, when they figure they can't keep this pig alive anymore because it can't really eat anything, then they'll kill it with a club and then pass out the meat and eat it. But the tusks become like talismans or prizes. And there's a line, I think it's on page 245. This is Tony Fry talking, because he's on this expedition too, I think, where they go off to the island to get the tusk. Pain is at the center of all religions, almost all beauty too. Fine things like human beings, for example, are born of pain, of great suffering, of intense in-driving horror. Fine things never come cheaply. Suppose the hog had run wild, ground down his tusks, done whatever he damned pleased. Who would have been richer or wiser or better? Only the hog and the guy that finally ate him. But as it was, well, that boar ennobled the life of an entire village. Well, so you take that, the thoughts on pain. You go to the next page, and this was a line that kept me up, talking about soldiers that snap. Last night he wanted to fight a man who said Los Angeles was bigger than Philadelphia. Well, I sure picked the dillies to argue with, Fry laughed. What happens to a guy like that? We send them home, mostly. Sometimes they snap out of it when real trouble begins on a beachhead. A couple of them have shot themselves. It all works out all right. But if there was ever a wild boar staked to a 3-foot circle, that's the guy. Yeah. So beauty comes from pain. Great. It's not so great, but whose pain? Well, how many people died in Okinawa? A whole bunch. Boy, the Japanese fought hard on those islands. I was watching a show. It might have been Saipan. I forget the name of the islands. There are so many of them. The Allies had taken the island. And there's a cliff on the other end. And the Japanese, and these were non-combatants, the Japanese, like these were some women, I guess, that they'd had working with them, were jumping off the cliff to their death.
With their kids. Yeah, it's Okinawa, I'm pretty sure.
Rather than surrender. Every inch of those islands was fought over. Ugh. That's a lot of boar's tusks.
Yeah.
I don't know what the positive conclusion about that is. I just thought that image was, I don't know. It's probably 2 a.m. when I was finishing reading this.
Yeah, me too. Ugh. Thanks, Karl. Man is few of days and full of woe.
Yeah.
I don't understand. Well, we've just developed, this is back to the war thing and the boar's test thing and the Okinawa thing. We've just got an aversion to suffering. It's become pathological.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. When I read the boar's test thing, I'm angered for all those people that went and did all this stuff. I guess because it's unnecessary. It seems pointless, but suffering itself in human life is not, I think Tony Fry's right in that sentence, beautiful things come out of them being difficult.
Huh. Socrates tells us in Greater Hippias that the noble things are difficult.
Yeah, we have that on a t-shirt, which you can get if you sign up at onlinegreatbooks.com/podcast.
Hell, you don't even have to sign up. Those are in the store.
Yes, but you could sign up.
You could sign up, and then you'll just get one. You know, there's some gamma right now. It's like, oh, it's easy for you to say in your air conditioning and saying it's suffering. No, listen, I get it, man. I get it. I think that understanding that things are cushy and that this is unusual is very important. I have a microbiology background, Karl.
Mm-hmm.
I got a whole bunch of credit hours of immunology. And I think we're due. The Spanish flu was 1918. It had its origin in China, by the way. I think we're due. And in January and February, I was really concerned that perhaps our laundry ticket came up, that we were going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't look like it, does it? I mean,
no, it wasn't the big one.
It's not the big one. It's no fun, but it ain't the big one. And even though I have some formal education and spent some formal time studying those kinds of things in preparation for a career that did not happen, fighting those kinds of things. And I would rather not deal with a new Spanish flu kind of a pandemic. I'm not scared of them. And I don't necessarily think a world and a life full of avoiding those kinds of things would be a virtuous one.
So I want to tell you a little story. So there's a young couple at the gym where I work. They live in the city. I don't know if they listen to the podcast. If they do, they'll know that I'm talking about them. And I like them very much. I'm going to miss them when they're gone. But what they've done, so this adversity that's happened, it's no fun to live in Chicago right now because you can't do anything.
Yeah.
So all the things you came to the city as a young professional to do are shut down. So you're just living in a box and you can't go anywhere. They're moving to northern Wisconsin. They closed on a house. I think this might be the best thing that ever happened to them. So the suffering, the difficulties, give them an excuse to make a real step.
Yeah.
And so he likes to hunt and fish, and she's a veterinary nurse. She'll find some work because they got critters up there.
I thought you were going to say vegetarian. I couldn't wait.
No, she's a real success story for training. I'm very proud of her for, speaking of weightlifting. She's about 6 feet tall and came in at 110 pounds and has put on a bunch of weight. And I tell you, it's good. Yeah. It's very good. She's strong and very proud of the work that we've done with her. But if the adversity had never happened, they'd probably live in the city for the rest of their life.
Right.
So adversity, boar's tusks grow out of it, pearls grow out of it. You make some decisions that matter rather than figuring out which Netflix series you're going to watch tonight.
Right.
Which doesn't matter. Who cares? Pick one. They don't matter. Having your life be a little bit tough. I don't want you shipped off to the South Pacific.
Nope.
Honestly, I don't. But having your life be a little bit tough makes it better. I think. That whole boar's tusk thing bugs me. Can I read one? I want to read a line that I really like.
Yes.
This is on page 122, as Emil is making his move. He's just told the story about how he killed a man. They're just kind of standing there quietly, and he says, "Nelly," he said quietly, scarcely audible above the lorikeets, "in the hottest months you could go to Australia." Nelly made no reply. She merely watched Debec as he rose, crossed the silent pavilion, and bent over her. She raised her lips. Although he merely brushed her lips with his, she had the distinct impression that she had been kissed by a man, a whole man, a man worthy to be loved. I like that bit.
I did too. Bloody Mary has the same sort of conception of Joe Cable, I think, too. And so I'm gonna say that this is Mitchener.
Okay.
I think Mitchener, in writing Debec, is trying to write what he sees as a man.
Mm-hmm.
Bloody Mary had been selling trinkets and screwing up the local economy, black market, selling stuff on the black market.
Oh, yeah, they used the atrobrine to dye the grass skirts.
Yeah. So they can't hardly get people to take their medicine because they, hold it under their tongue and then spit it out and use it as a dye. And time again, people have been sent to shut her down. And Joe Cable is sent to shut her little business down. And he does it in a way that is firm, but respectful of her. And I don't know exactly, but there's something about the way he treats her that makes her see him as a good man.
Well, he likes her.
And he treats her like a person. And she appreciates that about him. And then she, as a result, wants good for her daughter in that.
Yeah. Poor Joe couldn't do it, though.
Yeah. This is a rambling story. There are 42 plots in it. There are 19 total stories, some of which are dead ends. Some of them aren't. It's a kind of a Pulp Fiction kind of a thing, really. It's interesting. It's fun. I'm glad I read the thing. We are getting real close to our 100th episode, and that's almost 100 bits that we've read. It's in the bottom third.
You think so?
I do.
I don't know. I haven't ranked them. I liked it.
I did too, Karl. I did too.
History's been oppressing me. These are the books that were on my grandfather's shelf, so I feel like I know him a bit better. All he ever read was Civil War histories and Mitchener novels, it seems.
Did you like this or Zane Grey better?
I like the ending of Zane Grey a lot. I like the bulk of Tales of the South Pacific better.
Yeah.
I think the characters are more real.
Yeah. The Zane Grey is sort of Edwardian prose. It's kind of stilted and strange, and the characterizations are weird. Yeah, it's a coin flip for me, which one I would prefer to read on any given day. If you've read any other James Mitchener, if you've read Centennial, you've read Hawaii or Alaska or any of those others that he's written, I haven't read everything the man wrote, but this is nothing like those others I had read.
Mm-hmm.
This is nothing like Centennial. And by golly, it's a third of the size of that, too.
And if you get the pocket-sized edition, you could carry it with you, and you can read a story and then put it down.
Yeah.
Because they're pretty self-contained.
I'm glad that you suggested it. We've got another show that you guys should listen to. If you like this repartee, you can go look up the Music and Ideas podcast. We just did one on heavy metal. We did one on Western swing not too long ago, one on opera. We've got one coming up on string quartets. Come on. You'll like that. Go listen to that.
Are we going to change the name of that?
I don't know. I've had some suggestions.
The reason why, dear listener, is because it's hard to find. There are lots of shows about music and lots of shows about ideas. So if you type music and ideas, it's hard to come up with the podcast. We need some unique name. We're trying to come up with something.
Maybe we shouldn't. I don't even know. I keep telling people it's like if we started an automobile company and called it Cars and Trucks Inc. It's just hard to get. It's hard to be found in the SEO. When your competitors are rank for your name. Yeah, the little show's growing, and it's a whole lot of fun. This show is growing, too. Thank you so much for listening and sending it to friends of yours. If you want that T-shirt that says The Noble Things Are Difficult, you can join us. Or if you don't want to join us because you're a sissy, you can go to our website, onlinegreatbooks.com, and click on Shop. And by golly, you can buy one in there.
They might have other motives for not joining us.
Yeah, I don't buy it.
If that's true, if you're, like they say in my church, if you're absent for honorable reasons, you can go to the shop and buy a T-shirt, and that would help us out, too.
Yeah, it would. Thank you guys so much for listening. Next week, we're going to read and discuss Thomas Carlyle's essay, Signs of the Times, from 1829. Never read it. This thing might be awful.
How many pages?
9.
Ugh, it's a vacation.
I know. Guys, I'm ground to powder. Over the last 2 weeks, I've read these 2 darn things. I've cracked prior analytics again and had to read Aristotle's De Anima.
And I read 360 pages of Caesar.
Yeah, a whole lot more fun than prior analytics. Anyway, come join us. We'd love to have you, and we will talk to you about Carlyle next week.